Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Ridolphi. I live in Richmond, Virginia, and I am a mom to Jack, who's 17. He has a twin sister, Emma, and they just graduated last week from high school. I also have a daughter, Sophia, who's 19, and I'm a single mom.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Vanderweele. I live in the Chicago suburbs with my family. I'm married, my husband, Nick, and I have 2 children. My daughter is 7.5 going to 2nd grade, and my son with Duchenne, Logan, is almost 10 going into 4th grade.
So I'm Brian Denger. I live in southern Maine with my wife Alice and my son Patrick, who has Duchenne muscular dystrophy. He's 27. We lost his brother almost 10 years ago at age 20, heart failure as a result of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Their older sister, Rachel, is a nurse educator for endocrinology for type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and been involved with PPMD for over 20 years.
My name is Jen Schwartz. I'm from Des Moines, Iowa. My husband Brian is here today, and then I have 3 children. I have a 13-year-old daughter, Annabelle, a 9-year-old son, Ben, who has Duchenne, and then a 6-year-old son, Nate, who does not have Duchenne.
Hi, I'm Rhiannon Hubbard. I am a single mom. I have an 18-year-old with Becker who graduated from high school last month, and then I also have an 8-year-old who is unaffected.
All right, so you've all been to these interdisciplinary clinics?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about how that feels. Do you get a list of shoulds? And what's the one thing that you would like to change about the clinics? Should we just go back the other way? Start with you, Rhiannon.
Okay, so it's overwhelming a lot of times for clinic. One of the big things is it's overwhelming, I would say, and it's so many different things. We see not just neuromuscular clinic. My son sees a GI clinic and an endocrine clinic separately too, where we do the whole team thing. And it's just a lot of things all at one time, I would say, and a lot of times a long drive. So it's just, you're just tired and worn out before you even get there. So it can just be a lot to kind of keep up with a lot and, be able to ask the questions and then remember and then go back and, I should have asked all of these other things, so.
One thing that I think is really helpful for us is to know what we need to do that day. So who are we visiting with? Who do we have left on our schedule? That helps me space out our snacks and our games and our toys for our son, and also prepare him for who we're waiting for. So if it's a social worker, here's maybe some questions that we have. Or if it's this person, here's maybe some things we should think about. So just having a lay of the land for the day, I think, is really helpful.
So what about when all these different people come in, and they come in sequentially, they're not like collectively there, and they all say, well, what's new? Does anyone want to speak to that?
I will. This one is always bothered me because it's like you tell the same story over and over and over again. And by the time the last doctor gets to the room, you're totally emotionally, mentally wrecked because you're revisiting what is oftentimes really hard stuff. Or in our case, it was my son meeting or losing some of those, skills, and having him hear that over and over again, as much as we prep him to say that you're going to hear us talk about this, but also having to share it over and over again. And thankfully, Dr. Scavina, she's not here, but she made the good point. She said, but every time you tell a story, a little bit more comes out, and you tell it in a different way. And so there is a method to that, but it always just kind of wears me out, and I feel bad because by the time we tell the story for the last time, we're tapped out. We're done. We just want to get on there, and we say, why aren't you talking to each other before you come in?
Amy?
Well, I would just say my answer or approach to this question, I think, is different now that my son is almost 18. I'm really now focused on making him a partner and part of those decisions and those discussions, and also thinking a lot lately about he doesn't always get time one-on-one with his medical team, and there are questions and things I think that are on his mind that maybe he'd like to have a conversation without me present. And also just something I'm thinking about a lot lately is mental health. These guys go through a lot, and I often find that just gets lost in our clinic visits, that it just doesn't rise to the top, where that's something that they are struggling with, or at least my son has. and just like to see that part of the discussion and the visit as well.
So Brian, do you go to the visits?
I do. Actually, early on, as I mentioned, my daughter has type 1 diabetes, and there was a division of labor. There's 2 boys with Duchenne, and there's a daughter with diabetes. So I tackled the Duchenne part of it. I go to all the clinic appointments. There are times, now that my son is an adult, we travel from Maine to Baltimore for clinic. I go with Patrick independently of Alice, and it gives mom some respite time at home. She's kicking her feet up and watching her crime shows. So when I disappear, we'll know what happened. But I do go to clinic with Patrick, and over the years I've tried to develop the habit of deferring to him more and more because the clinic is about him.
So when we talked on the phone, we talked about palliative care. And I know for all of us, sometimes the assumption of palliative care means that there is this window of opportunity and it means end of life care. And we talked about palliative care. Who has palliative care on their team and how did you feel about it? Was it you, Kate?
Yeah, that was me. We just brought palliative care onto our team, and it was really through conversations with PPMD and other families, hearing their positive experiences with it, that I thought, we need this. And it seems crazy because my son's on the younger side, but it just landed in a place where, we're facing all these transitions, and it felt like our quality of life really took a hit. And we were getting bombarded with a lot of questions too from school of, how do you want us to talk about it? This is what we're seeing, and we're kind of seeing a different side of ours. They're seeing a different side of our son than we're used to. And so is there something we're missing? And so bringing palliative care in was really, it was really helpful in just starting that relationship of how do we talk about it together. And you heard the siblings talk about a lot of transparency, and that's a cornerstone of our family. And it was very helpful and validating to hear you have good communication, you're very transparent and you're not missing anything. But some families might be, and some people might need that extra help about how do we frame it? How do we talk about it? How do we have hard conversations going forward? And that's really where I felt the value was how do we get this team, this person a part of our team so that when the hard stuff comes, we also have somebody in our corner. And it's not taking away from the other specialists, it's just adding in. And it really reassured me that they're on my side, they're on Logan's side. They're seeing all of us, the whole picture, and they're also understanding the medical part of it. And my takeaway too is I could go to my mom or sister or girlfriend and I could talk about, what do you think I should do about X, Y, and Z? And whatever you think is best is usually the answer. And so it's so helpful to have somebody that actually really understands the medical side of it too, as we're looking at how to make big decisions or hard ones when they're going to come up, because it's not a matter of if, it's when.
How did you introduce it to Logan? Did you say, or did he have assumptions about that?
Yeah, no, well, it kind of was good timing because we just also introduced a social worker to him at school. And I just said, this is somebody who is going to understand the medical side and just really going to help talk about our feelings and your quality of life. And do you know what quality of life means? It's just, are you happy? Are you comfortable? Or do you have pain? These are all things that this person can help with. And they just want to get to know you and know who you are.
And you're all shaking your hand. So, Rhiannon, let's talk about this.
Yeah, I think that's so important. My son has seen counselors and deals with mental health kind of separately, and it hasn't been something that's been brought up really or managed within kind of clinic type of aspect, kind of as a separate deal. But I think it's so important to be able to talk about those things and really have those conversations. And one of the things we were talking about before, when we all talked prior to, was about having those conversations where the boys can have those conversations, and then also where we can have those conversations, maybe with palliative care, where there's not always conversations or questions we want to ask in front of them, and being able to kind of have those separate aspects where the boys can have their kind of time, and then also have a little bit of that aspect where, as grown-ups, we can talk about some of those scary things and say, okay, how can together as a team we can approach this and kind of make sure that they're aware of what's going on and all of those things.
Thank you. So 2 of you have husbands, 2 of you are single parents, and you have a wife as far as I know.
Currently.
Currently, yeah, for what, 40 years or something? Yeah, okay, so currently, she's current, good. So do your husbands go to visits? Do you have difference of opinions about this? Do you talk about all of the interdisciplinary care? How does it all work?
I can start. So typically pre-COVID, my husband and I would go to all the appointments together. Post-COVID, usually one of us goes now. Before the appointment, we go through what are the questions that you have, what are the questions that I have. Early on, we were frustrated with each other because we had very different questions. His were very research-based. Mine were very quality of life, PT type of questions. So it took us a little while to be able to understand each other's perspectives and what we all wanted to accomplish in a single visit. We also try to say, hey, before we send a message to our medical team, let's check with each other because maybe one of us knows the answer that we've just had a bit different conversation, or we can tack on additional questions to it. I appreciate our medical team really recognizes that we come from different places, and especially in those really stressful first visits where there's so many emotions and it's hard to even articulate. You know, now 5 years later, we can walk in and say, here are questions, here's what we're thinking. But early on, it's really hard to do that where it's more emotions and some form of questions.
So have you also participated in a clinical trial? And okay, can you tell us a little bit about clinical care, clinical trials, how that intersected, if it did, and if you felt any one of those things was shortchanged just because of time, you know, compressed time?
I don't feel like either of them were shortchanged, but I do feel like it was a really big decision for our family on medical trial. We had a poster board up in our house that had, here are all the trials that our son's eligible for, here are the pros, here are the cons. We talked a lot with our medical team about what should we be considering for him, or here are questions that we have. And eventually all the doors opened to the trial that probably was the right trial for him. But it did take, we were both looking at very different criteria of what we wanted out of the trial. Like I was looking at how invasive it was, and he was looking at what does he think has the best outcome. So trying to weigh very different criteria there. And I also appreciate our medical teams understand that's a really big decision for us, and so they're very supportive. They're always willing to ask questions or answer questions or provide us with some additional perspective.
Thank you. Kate, were you in a trial?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you and your husband had the same sort of philosophy?
We were mostly aligned, but we were kind of like Jen, like we just kind of see, actually our biggest struggle was actually when we decided to end the clinical trial. We were in expanded access, and so we really had different views, and so it was really helpful. I usually take most of the lead on all the Duchenne stuff. I'm a nurse by training. It's just my comfort zone. But my husband shows up to every appointment that he can. And so he catches a lot of stuff I don't. And so it was really helpful when we had to make that decision of what next, that, and are we seeing the same thing or not, that, you know, I was grateful we had different perspective at that time. And then to your original question, our trial was at a center that we get care at, and so I found that to be really easy breezy because there was so much open communication, and so I thought that was a big benefit, especially when it also came to what do we do next coming off of the trial, and how do we move forward with different med protocols.
Amy, were you in trials?
Yes. As I mentioned, I'm a single mom, so one of the challenging things was sort of navigating that with my ex-husband, and especially initially, it was tough because he sort of abandoned sort of the part of his, responsibility as far as coming to appointments. That was all left to me. So I felt it was very frustrating because I'd go and gather all this information, and then I felt he would often second guess. So we got to, and I think that was less about, it was more about his fear, and I think we overcame that through a lot of talking it out, and also, connecting him with the medical team and giving him the chance to answer his questions. That really helped us get through that. And I've also had the experience of having trials that were also connected with where we get our care. And I really appreciate that. I always feel like our doctors are always talking to us about what's next, what the opportunities are. And I really value having those perspectives while we're at clinic.
Good. Rhiannon, trials?
Yes, yeah, my son just wrapped up a trial in November, and he did it at the same where he gets care at UCLA, and that was very helpful for us. I think it was really helpful for us too. He started to make some decisions, get a little bit more involved, especially as we're going through the protocol, having to keep up with everything as he's transitioning to kind of this adult aspect of maintaining his care and managing that. I don't know that he'll sign up for a trial very soon again. He was very kind of overwhelmed by the whole experience over the year. But we're glad that we did it and we had that opportunity. And now it's something that he kind of knows a little bit more what to expect going forward and kind of seeing the different things that may be out there.
Did any of your boys say, I don't want to do this trial in the middle of it or the beginning of it or near the end? Like, this is
Mine
way
almost
overwhelming.
kind of halfway through, he was like, I'm not sure, I don't know. And then I was like, at any time you can stop, you don't have to do it. And then he thought about it. He's like, no, I want to. I want to finish it out. And
My son was unsure at first, so it did take, he had a lot of questions that we went through, and, they were just so wonderful with him about answering his questions, giving him the information, but also not sugarcoating it, which I really appreciated, as a teenager. He can understand these things and he has to have a say in it. It didn't change his mind, but that support helped him make a decision, helped us make a decision together that worked best for him.
Good, thank you. And Patrick's been in
at least 10 studies, and I had actually the opposite experience. He was in a clinical trial in which he was experiencing some negative side effects, and some of them were pretty serious. And he was over 18. I am his support group. We traveled from Maine to Baltimore every week to participate in this trial, and he was having these serious side effects with the treatment, with what he was receiving. It wasn't a treatment, but the potential treatment. And I tried to support him and not influence his decision, but it was making me crazy, realizing that he's an autonomous person. He could make these decisions. He's very science-minded, and he understood the need to understand what was going on. And finally, he reached a point when he said, "You know what? It really is time to end this." And I felt such relief. But as a parent, you want to protect your child, but I also understood he had to do things to his level of comfort and had to come to that decision on his own. It was really very hard.
So for a lot of you whose sons are older, do you ever feel the need to, maybe this is just my personality, to take the doctor aside and say, here's the deal, and here's what you need to say, and sort of try to shape the conversation? Well, okay, so I'm sorry, that's the way I am. Do you ever try to do that?
I try to resist the urge to do that, but I think that's how I feel. Or, I do find myself wanting to have a quick, hey, here's what's going on. Jack may not say this to you, but I want you to be aware, just to try to, but I think we, as parents, when our kids are diagnosed, we're so on top of things. We're looking for answers. We're trying to, what is the next trial? What's the best thing? And so I've really had a hard time making that shift to where he's going to be an adult. He's going to college. He's going to have to be able to advocate for himself. He's going to have to be able to make these decisions and know how to advocate for himself. So I just think it's a really tough shift, and I don't always do it very well.
Jen, you're shaking your head.
The very first conference that we went to was a day conference, and I said to my husband on the drive, it was a 2.5-hour drive, I said, we can't stay all day. I won't make it. And I said, the last speaker is talking about college, so let's leave for that session. And we ended up staying, and on the way home, I said, that was the best session of the day, because she set this tone on, here's what you need to do for your child to be independent and to make their own decisions. And our son was 3 at the time, but that gave me a perspective of, how do I set this up to help him be like an independent adult? adult or somebody who goes to college on their own. So we try when the doctors come in to say, okay, Ben, tell him a little bit about what's been going on and let him lead, and then we fill in all the gaps. But I also still have that same tendency of there's one more thing you forgot to tell them about. So
You get home and think, there's the 10 things I forgot to talk
Yep.
about.
exactly.
So that comes down to time. Do you think that there's enough time for you to be heard and listened to in clinic? Or do you go home and think, I was going to say damn it all, but never mind that. I missed some things.
No, I don't think there's ever enough time because you're seeing so many people. It's just impossible. You're allocated for 15 minutes, and it's just it depends on the season you're in, really. Sometimes you need an hour with neurology. Sometimes you need 5 minutes with cardiology. It just depends on what's going on. But I always feel like, oh, I needed to say this and I couldn't, and we just ran out of time. Yeah, definitely.
Rhiannon?
Yeah, I would say definitely feeling like it's not quite enough time. Sometimes, like we were saying too, it's over and over. So sometimes it feels like, okay, we talked about this, we talked about that, and being able to shift gears a little bit more into getting into maybe we need to spend more time on this and asking those questions or getting those topics in there. My son, now that he just turned 18, he actually just did last week his first visit with primary care adult all by himself. He did a Zoom visit. He didn't want me to do it with him. And that was very hard to just resist that aspect of this is your first time establishing with this new doctor, and I'm just going to let you do that. And I may go to the next one when it's in person. But kind of that aspect of being a grown-up and taking it over. And I think I've resisted a lot as he was younger. I teach college, so I very much teach my students all the time about advocating for themselves, and your parents can't make your doctor's appointments and all of those types of things. So he's had a little bit of that practice of kind of being the one engaging and just sitting back and then okay, and I can send them emails, and then now I can't anymore. And now it'll just be, trusting that it's going to be okay, and we'll figure it out if it's not, and, still being there.
But then after his appointment, did you ask him 1,000 questions? What happened and what did you say and
I
what
did,
happened? And who said
but
what?
I resisted myself. He's very reserved, and he was like, it's fine. I got my prescriptions. I'm good. I have 45 days. I'll go back in 45 days and see him in person. And that was kind of all that I got. And I was like, okay. And I'm just trusting. And it's hard with 18 to trust, but yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to trust 18, period.
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 Yes.
Yeah, 18.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when the physicians, do they kick you out and say, I want to talk to this young man privately? Have you had that experience? Yeah? Amy?
So we went through a few visits where they did that, and around COVID, I just feel like everything blew up, and we stopped doing that. But I was relieved that they just said we're going to do this now, because it meant that I didn't have to. It was no awkward oh, can Jack talk to you alone? I found it helpful, and I'd like to see that brought back as something. And maybe not all parents would be comfortable with that. Maybe that's down to the decisions of the families. But I think it's important, and it's something I'd like to see it every time we go to clinic.
Jen?
Our medical team has started prepping us that they'll start doing that as Ben gets a little bit older, just to say at some point we'll probably ask you to run to the restroom or, step out and get a snack. And then we can talk to them and start to make that kind of a regular part of the practice. And I appreciate starting those conversations very early so we're not in the middle of appointments saying, oh my gosh, what are you doing now? So,
Brian, are you kicked out?
Yeah, so that actually was initiated about the time the boys were going through puberty, which I think is appropriate. And I think that there are questions they may want to ask that mom and dad don't need to hear. Curiosity, just questions about themselves, their growth, their development. One of the things I would advocate for is also an opportunity to kick the kids out so that mom and dad can ask, we're seeing this, and you want to protect one another, but you also want information to be frank, and sometimes that would be the way to go about it.
So do you
Yes.
think you really could, Kate, do you think you could kick a 16-year-old out of the room and say, I'm going to talk about you, and that would work?
No, not at all. And I was just saying, we had just recently had a clinic, and we had to have a really frank conversation. And Logan was in the room, and he was sitting there with his headphones on and his iPad, and it's assumed he's not paying attention, but he is. He told the social worker at school the next day, they didn't think I was listening, but I heard every word they said. And you think, gosh, he's too young to get it, but he's not. And I know my kid, and I really, really wish somebody had distracted him and taken him out of the room. And so it's hard to say at this age or stage. I think it really depends on the family dynamics and that child in particular.
But clinicians, do you think they know all those family dynamics? You walk in the room and then they have sort of the set schedule. Is there something we could sort of identify or say, hey, to this team or to the nurse coordinator or to a member of the team and say, here's what's happening before? Because if you're a clinician and you're going from room to room to room, you don't always know what the circumstances are, what the conversation is. And this is where I think Rachel's been talking about language. Sometimes you go in, I've got to check the 30, these first 30 things, and then we go on. So recommendations.
I think you could do an easy check form on the check-in box to say, like, we'd like some time alone, or our son would like some time alone. And you don't even have to go through like what that is, but just so they know we need to excuse one person for a few minutes.
Good idea. Rhiannon?
I think also, especially when there's social workers involved and we have some of those more kind of personal conversations and some of those types of things too, putting, like we said, like a checkbox or some type of on clinic today, this is what's going on with the family, or, these are our big struggles, or this is what we discussed, or things are fine, or those types of things, and having kind of a briefing so that each person doesn't come in and say, hey, don't ask that question about that. We already, we're tired of talking about the Lakers lost or whatever it may be that was a sore spot randomly, right? And these little things like that, and having that kind of briefing there, but somewhere, everything's all electronic. There can be like a little blurb that pops up. This is kind of what's going on today with them, because they don't know. And sometimes it is different, and it's different in what's going on, how old our boys are, all of those different types of things.
You fill out, it feels like 100 forms before the appointment even, especially on like my chart now, you have to answer all these questions, and can't that be one of them? Or maybe I just need a 5-minute phone call with the clinic nurse before clinic, just to touch base.
We also have a whiteboard in our clinic, and Ben's still young, but sometimes he'll draw pictures. And so whenever the medical professional comes in, they say, oh, what is this? And that's usually tied to whatever we're talking about, like a great experience that he had or a question that he has. So sometimes it's nice to leave that up on the board all day, and then it also entertains him to like add to it or modify it.
Yeah, we and too bad Mayna's not here, because Mayna had some family issues and couldn't join, but she talks about the fact that in her clinic, we've had some discussions about language and about trying to understand the family dynamics, and she walks in often to the clinic and asks, what's the best thing that happened this week? So that she can set the stage for, how are things? And she said she can take the temperature of that family just by asking some of these leading questions. Do any of the people at your clinic start off with those kinds of conversations? Yeah? And is it usually the neurologist, or is it somebody else?
I think overall, as a whole, I think it's just about every provider that comes in the room. I really appreciate when they aren't just talking to me or my husband. They're really talking to Logan, and that really helps break the ice and the tension.
It's also usually tied to the end of the school year. What are you doing this summer? Something that's kind of seasonal on whatever time of year it might be.
Mm-hmm. So do you have recommendations? What would you like to see improved about these interdisciplinary clinics? If you could do one thing to change them, in addition to the checkbox of, I need some private time, or he would like private time, or, my husband would like private time, or whatever. Do you have some thoughts about what else could we see them do? Okay.
Can I go? You started out, Pat, by talking about how when we leave, we often feel so overwhelmed with all the shoulds. You should do this, you should do this. And even the most on top of it, well-organized parent walks away just a little dazed and just wrung out. And so it's so helpful. I shared this with this group before. As we were leaving, the clinic nurse ran out and she said, oh, I got that form filled out for you. Would you like me just to fax it on over for you to the XYZ office? And I cried, you guys, because it was one less thing I had to do, and it was probably the easiest thing on my list to actually tackle. But the fact that that she just handled it for me. And so I guess my point is, what could they do is more of a, okay, this is your list of shoulds. This is the highest priority, and what do you need help accomplishing? Or what could we do to make sure that you can implement X, Y, and Z?
Jen?
The other thing is, especially now that sometimes we split up our appointments, having a sheet, especially at some major decision points. I came home trying to say, okay, the medication, I'm trying to Google it, coming up with what exactly the medication was, and here are ranges of options. So if you have a critical decision point, to be able to give some of that information in a one-sheeter, or even just writing down the name of the medication, so that you can take it home and discuss it. And we all want to like learn and educate ourselves on some of that, to say, okay, so what does PPMD have to say about this medication, or what is their recommendation? So anything you can give as a takeaway, especially on some of those bigger decision points.
Rhiannon, thoughts?
Yeah, I think like having even a check-in after, like a week or 2 weeks after, right? Here was your list of shoulds. Were you able to accomplish everything? Did you run into insurance problems with getting that test done or ordered, or those types of things, to kind of make sure that the things don't fall through the cracks again. And just being able to have that kind of that communication. I know it's super helpful when clinics, when we're able to email and get back and forth rather than, you know, having to call or trying to go through all the different hoops. And kind of having that be a focus part of like a debriefing afterwards. Once we're like, oh, and these are these other questions that I had, and being able to kind of check in shortly after until, you know, at 6 months or a year later.
Brian, thoughts?
So for me, I think that there are a lot of assumptions made by specialists in a clinic. And oftentimes you're motivated to go because you want your better care for your son or daughter. And I think that the assumptions are that you understand all the medical terminology. And particularly when you first start going to clinic, it's very difficult to understand the hows, the whys. And I think that if a little more time was spent explaining to the family, this is why these interventions are important. We're trying to do this. We're trying to achieve that. These are the goals. As time goes on, your understanding is going to increase, and you'll get it. But I think early on, it's like when you're talking to a family member about Duchenne, and they get that glazed over look. Well, we're like that in the clinic as well. But as time goes on, you understand more. But I think with the early visits, there should be more time spent making sure that people understand why we're doing these interventions, what is the goal that we're trying to achieve, and what are we trying to accomplish.
Thank you. Amy?
I mentioned earlier on mental health. I think that's something, maybe it's just unique to us because we're seeing care out of state. We have really struggled to connect my son with, you know, any kind of mental health provider who could really help him through some of the, you know, just what he's had on his mind lately. And I feel like that doesn't come up. And maybe, you know, having palliative care, that might be helpful, but just, you know, acknowledging that this is a weighty thing, you know, for us as parents, but also for our sons. And there's a lot on their minds, and I don't know if that's working in as questions or helping to connect us with resources, but that's something that I really feel that we've kind of missed.
I think the mental health issues are significant in all families and in all people, and certainly all of us who've come through a pandemic, and the fears and worries around the pandemic, and if many of us have seen people we love die. Well, first of all, I can't thank you enough, but I also want to say to the healthcare professionals, I think sometimes as parents we come in there, you know, we want to sort of dump all this on you, and sometimes I think we forget that you are doing clinical care, you're on service, you're running clinical trials, and you're trying to make sure to balance all that. So we are so grateful to you, and so happy to be able to say, here are the things that could help us a little bit. Here are the things we appreciate, and certainly of these interdisciplinary care centers and all of the healthcare providers in this space who care deeply. We're really, really grateful to all you do. And thank you to this panel. You are all amazing, but I just think this is the power of advocacy, and this is the power of us to be able to really connect with healthcare, with industry, to design clinical trials, and to move this field. So thank you very much. Now you can have refreshments and wine and other stuff. The poster session is down there. Usually I'm lost, right? But it's down there and around the corner. So thank you very much, and then we'll start again tomorrow. And thank you all for sitting so long and for listening to all of us.